13-year-old Emma Richardson stood at her bedroom window, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Her emerald green eyes, so vivid they seemed to capture light itself, reflected a world of dreams and fairy tales that had sustained her through years of uncertainty. The modest ranch house in Phoenix had been her home for as long as she could remember, yet something always felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing its most important piece. "Emma, sweetheart, come downstairs," called Margaret Richardson from the kitchen, her voice carrying an unusual excitement that made Emma's heart skip. "Your father and I have wonderful news." Emma bounded down the wooden stairs, her long auburn hair bouncing with each step. In the living room, she found Margaret and David Richardson seated on their worn leather couch, both wearing expressions she had never seen before, a mixture of triumph and barely contained nervousness. David, a man whose gambling habits had led them deeper into debt each passing month, cleared his throat and attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Emma, do you remember how we've always talked about giving you opportunities we never had?" Emma nodded eagerly, settling cross-legged on the carpet before them. Margaret leaned forward, her manicured hands clasped tightly together. "Well, we've been contacted by a very prestigious cultural exchange program. They've selected you, specifically you, for an incredible opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" Emma asked, her imagination already spinning with possibilities of adventure and discovery. Margaret's voice grew more animated, though her fingers trembled slightly as she spoke. "There's a wealthy businessman from Texas, Mr. Alexander Mansfield. He owns oil companies, has connections throughout the Southwest, and he's looking for a bright young girl to participate in a special mentorship program." David nodded enthusiastically, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Think about it, Emma. You'd live in a mansion, learn about business, culture, travel the world. It's like something out of those fairy tale books you love so much." Emma's eyes widened. The Richardsons had been struggling financially for years. She'd overheard enough hushed conversations about overdue bills and mounting debts to understand their situation, even if they tried to shield her from it. "But what about school? What about you both?" "Oh, darling," Margaret reached out to stroke Emma's hair, "this is just for a little while. Mr. Mansfield has the finest tutors, and you'll receive an education that could set you up for life. We want what's best for you." That evening, as Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling, excitement and anxiety battled in her chest. She had always dreamed of adventure, of discovering worlds beyond the dusty streets of Phoenix. The idea of living in a mansion, of learning from a successful businessman, seemed like a dream come true. Yet something in her adoptive parents' manner, the way Margaret's hands shook, the way David kept wiping his palms on his jeans, left her with a nagging sense of unease. The following morning brought a flurry of activity. Margaret rushed around, packing Emma's belongings into 2 large suitcases, her movements sharp and hurried. "Remember, Emma," she said, folding clothes with unusual precision, "this Mr. Mansfield is a very important man. You must be respectful, grateful, and do exactly as he says. This opportunity could change all our lives." David stood in the doorway, jingling his car keys nervously. "The car will be here soon to take us to the airport. Emma, I need you to understand something. This is bigger than just a mentorship. Mr. Mansfield has specifically requested you, and he's offered to help our family in ways you can't imagine." Emma looked up from the book she was reading, confused by the weight in his voice. "What do you mean, specifically me?" Margaret and David exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction too long. He heard about your academic achievements. Your potential," Margaret said quickly. "You're special, Emma. More special than you know." The private car that arrived was unlike anything Emma had ever seen, a black luxury sedan with tinted windows and leather seats softer than velvet. As they drove through Phoenix toward the airport, Emma pressed her face to the window, watching her familiar world shrink away. Part of her felt like Cinderella being whisked away to the ball, while another part wondered why her fairy tale felt so rushed, so secretive. At the airport, they boarded a private jet that took Emma's breath away. Crystal glasses, plush seating, and a level of luxury she had only seen in movies. Margaret and David seemed as overwhelmed as she was, though they tried to hide it behind forced smiles and overeager compliments about the aircraft's amenities. During the flight to Dallas, Emma noticed her adoptive parents whispering in urgent, hushed tones. Occasionally she caught fragments. "The debt will be forgiven, enough to start over. She doesn't need to know everything yet." When she asked what they were discussing, they quickly changed the subject, pointing out the clouds below or offering her another snack from the elaborate spread provided. As the plane descended toward Dallas, Emma saw the sprawling Texas landscape unfold beneath them, endless plains dotted with oil derricks and ranches that stretched to the horizon. Her heart raced with anticipation and apprehension. Whatever awaited her at Mr. Mansfield's estate, she knew her life was about to change forever. The landing was smooth, and as they disembarked, Emma was struck by the oppressive Texas heat, so different from Arizona's dry warmth. A uniformed driver waited beside another luxury vehicle, this one even more impressive than the first. He introduced himself as James, Mr. Mansfield's personal assistant, a man with kind but tired eyes who spoke with a soft southern accent. "Welcome to Texas, Miss Emma," James said, helping load their luggage. "Mr. Mansfield is very excited to meet you. The estate is about an hour's drive from here." As they traveled through the Texas countryside, Emma marveled at the vast oil fields and the occasional mansion visible in the distance. Margaret and David sat stiffly beside her, their earlier excitement replaced by a tension that seemed to grow with each passing mile. "James," Emma ventured, "what exactly will I be doing at Mr. Mansfield's estate?" James glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Mansfield will explain everything when you arrive, Miss Emma. He's a man who likes to handle important matters personally." The answer didn't satisfy Emma's curiosity, but something in James's tone discouraged further questions. Instead, she watched the landscape change as they approached what could only be the Mansfield estate. Gates of wrought iron and gold opened automatically, revealing a driveway lined with ancient oak trees that led to a mansion straight out of her wildest dreams. The house was a monument to wealth and power, 3 stories of white stone with columns that reached toward the sky, perfectly manicured gardens and fountains that caught the afternoon sun like liquid diamonds. As their car pulled up to the grand entrance, Emma felt her breath catch. This was beyond anything she had imagined, a palace that made her feel both excited and somehow very, very small. James opened the car door and offered his hand to help her out. As Emma stepped onto the marble steps leading to the front door, she noticed other cars in the circular driveway, expensive vehicles that suggested they were not the only guests arriving today. Her adoptive parents flanked her, their faces a mixture of awe and barely concealed anxiety. The massive front doors opened as if by magic, revealing an interior that belonged in a museum. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns on marble floors, and the ceilings soared so high they seemed to touch the clouds. But what struck Emma most was the sound, soft music floating through the air, and the murmur of voices that suggested our gathering was already underway. "Welcome to Mansfield Estate," James said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that Emma couldn't quite interpret. "Mr. Mansfield is waiting." James led them through corridors adorned with oil paintings and Persian rugs, each step echoing off marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Emma tried to take in every detail, the antique vases filled with fresh white roses, the suits of armor, standing sentinel in alcoves, the way sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting everything in jeweled hues. It was magical. Yet something about the silence between the adults walking beside her made her stomach flutter with unease. They entered a grand dining hall where the scene before Emma made her pause. Several families were seated around an enormous mahogany table, and what struck her immediately was how similar the gathering was to her own situation. Each family consisted of adults who looked nervous and excited, accompanied by girls who appeared to be around her age. The girls sat quietly, their eyes downcast, while their guardians engaged in animated conversations with impeccably dressed staff members. "How wonderful," Margaret whispered, gripping Emma's shoulder a bit too tightly. "You'll have other girls." your age to befriend." At the head of the table sat a man who could only be Alexander Mansfield. Despite being in his 70s, he commanded the room with a presence that seemed to draw all attention toward him. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit clearly tailored by the finest craftsman, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, surveyed the gathering with the confidence of someone accustomed to absolute control. Ah, the Richardson family. Mr. Mansfield stood, his voice carrying easily across the vast room. "Welcome. To enter my home. Emma, I've heard remarkable things about you." Emma felt her cheeks flush as every eye in the room turned toward her. She managed a small curtsy, something she'd seen in movies but never performed before. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Mansfield. Your home is beautiful." Mr. Mansfield's smile was warm, yet Emma noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Please sit. We have much to discuss, and I believe you'll find tonight's festivities quite enlightening." As they took their seats, Emma found herself between a girl with blonde hair and another with dark brown curls. The blonde girl, who couldn't have been more than 12, kept her hands folded in her lap and spoke only when directly addressed by the adults. The brunette occasionally glanced at Emma with an expression that seemed to carry a warning, though Emma couldn't understand what she might be trying to communicate. The dinner itself was extraordinary. Courses of food Emma had never tasted, served on china so delicate it seemed like it might break at a touch. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight, and soft music played from somewhere she couldn't identify. Yet as the evening progressed, Emma noticed patterns that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Every so often, Mr. Mansfield's assistant, a different man from James, this one younger with cold eyes, would approach one of the families and request something that made Emma's heart race. He would ask the parents to remove their daughter's shoes. The request was made quietly, almost reverently, and without exception, every parent complied immediately. Emma watched in growing confusion as each girl was asked to stand, barefoot, while Mr. Mansfield observed them with the intensity of someone appraising precious objects. The parents watched eagerly, their faces bright with hope and anticipation, while the girls themselves seemed to shrink inward, as if trying to become invisible. "What's happening?" Emma whispered to the blonde girl beside her. The girl's eyes widened in fear, and she shook her head slightly, glancing toward her parents before looking down at her plate. Just do what they ask," she whispered back. "Don't ask questions." Emma's heart began to pound. This wasn't the cultural exchange program she had imagined. This wasn't a mentorship opportunity. Something else was happening here, something that made every instinct she possessed scream that she needed to pay attention, needed to understand what was really going on. When the assistant approached their section of the table, Emma felt Margaret's hand grip her wrist. "Emma, sweetheart," Margaret's voice was strained, artificially bright. "The gentleman would like you to remove your shoes. It's part of a traditional greeting." David nodded enthusiastically, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "It's an honor. Emma, Mr. Mansfield wants to properly welcome you to his home." Emma looked around the table at the other girls, all barefoot now, all standing with their heads down while Mr. Mansfield moved from one to another with the methodical precision of someone conducting a very important examination. Her mouth went dry as she realized what was happening, what this gathering really was. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice smaller than she intended. "Why does he need to see our feet?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret's face went pale and David's jaw tightened. Around the table, other parents shifted uncomfortably, while their daughters remained silent as if they had learned that speaking up was not allowed. Mr. Mansfield himself answered, his voice gentle but carrying an undertone of authority that brooked no argument. "In my culture, Emma, the feet tell us much about a person's character, their potential, their suitability for important roles. It's an ancient practice, one that has served me well in making crucial decisions." Emma's mind raced. She thought of the fairy tales she loved, of Cinderella and the glass slipper, but this felt nothing like those stories. This felt wrong, invasive, like being examined by someone who saw her not as a person, but as something to be evaluated and potentially purchased. "What kind of decisions?" Emma asked, surprising herself with her boldness. The room fell silent. Mr. Mansfield studied her with renewed interest, his head tilted slightly as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Perceptive," he murmured. "I like that. Very well, Emma. I'm looking for someone special, someone unique to join my family in a very particular way. These other lovely girls are candidates, but I suspect you might be exactly what I've been searching for, sir." Margaret practically vibrated with excitement beside her. "Emma, don't you see? He's choosing you for something wonderful. Remove your shoes, darling. Show Mr. Mansfield how special you are." But Emma's instincts, honed by years of feeling, like an outsider even in her own home, told her that nothing about this situation was wonderful. The other girls' silence, their parents' desperate enthusiasm, the way Mr. Mansfield examined each girl like she was livestock at auction, it all painted a picture that made Emma's skin crawl. "What happens to the girl you choose?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. Mr. Mansfield's smile widened, and for the first time that evening it seemed genuine. "Direct questions. I appreciate that quality. The girl I choose will become part of my family, Emma. She will want for nothing have access to education and opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. She will be treasured." The word treasured sent chills down Emma's spine. It was the way he said it, like she would be a precious object to be kept and admired, rather than a person to be loved and respected. She looked around the table again, at the other families, and suddenly understood with crystal clarity what was really happening. This wasn't a mentorship program. This wasn't a cultural exchange. This was something much more sinister, disguised behind wealth and elegance and promises of opportunity. These parents, including Margaret and David, had brought their daughters here for a reason that had nothing to do with education or betterment. "I need to use the restroom," Emma said suddenly, standing before anyone could stop her. James appeared, beside her immediately, as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Of course, Miss Emma, I'll escort you." As Emma walked beside James through the corridors, her mind raced with plans and possibilities. She needed to understand what was really happening, needed to find a way to protect not just herself, but the other girls who seemed trapped in this golden cage. The fairy tale she had imagined was turning into a nightmare, but unlike the heroines in her beloved stories, she would not wait for someone else to rescue her. James led Emma through a maze of corridors, past portraits of stern-faced men and women who seemed to watch their every step. As they walked, Emma noticed details she had missed before. Security cameras subtly placed in corners, keypad locks on certain doors, and windows that, despite their beauty, were fitted with bars disguised as decorative ironwork. "James," Emma said softly, "how long have you worked for Mr. Mansfield?" James paused, his hand hovering over the handle of a door marked Ladies' Lounge. For a moment, his professional composure slipped, revealing something Emma hadn't expected: compassion, mixed with deep resignation. "Long enough to know that some questions are dangerous to ask, Miss Emma," he replied quietly, "but also long enough to recognize courage when I see it." Emma studied his face, searching for meaning in his cryptic words. "The other girls, are they really here for mentorship programs?" James looked around, ensuring they were alone, then leaned closer. "What do you think, Miss Emma? What does your heart tell you?" Before Emma could answer, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. James straightened immediately, his professional mask sliding back into place. "The restroom is through that door. Take your time." Inside the ornate bathroom, Emma stared at her reflection in the gold-framed mirror. Her green eyes, so distinctive and unusual, stared back at her with a mixture of fear and determination. She thought about the other girls at the dinner table, their silence, their parents' enthusiasm, and Mr. Mansfield's careful examination of each one. The pieces were forming a picture she didn't want to complete, but couldn't ignore. This wasn't about education or opportunity. This was about something much darker, something that made her adoptive parents excited enough to bring her here, despite their obvious nervousness. When she returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had changed. Several families had been dismissed, their daughters apparently not meeting whatever criteria Mr. Mansfield was using. Only 3 girls remained, including Emma, and the tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Mansfield stood at the head of the table, his demeanor more serious than before. "We have reached the final stage of our selection process," he announced. "The remaining families will spend the night as my guests, and tomorrow we will hold the ceremony that will change one young woman's life forever." Margaret grabbed Emma's hand, squeezing so tightly it hurt. "Did you hear that, Emma? You're still being considered. This is wonderful news." But Emma noticed that the other 2 girls looked terrified rather than excited. The blonde girl from Salm dinner was crying silently, while her parents whispered urgent reassurances that sounded more like threats. The brunette sat rigidly straight, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the room, as if she had retreated somewhere inside herself, where she couldn't be reached. That night, Emma was given a room that was more luxurious than anything she had ever experienced. The bed was draped in silk, the carpet was so thick her feet sank into it, and French doors led to a balcony overlooking the estate's gardens. Under different circumstances, she would have felt like a princess. Instead, she felt like a bird in a gilded cage. She waited until the house grew quiet, then carefully opened the French doors and stepped onto the balcony. The night air was warm and filled with the scent of jasmine from the gardens below. In the distance, she could see lights from other parts of the estate, and she wondered if the other girls were awake too, planning their own escapes or resigning themselves to whatever fate awaited them. As she stood there trying to formulate a plan, she heard voices from the garden below. Peering over the balcony's edge, she saw Mr. Mansfield walking with James and another man she didn't recognize. They were speaking in low tones, but the night air carried their words clearly. "The Richardson girl shows promise," Mr. Mansfield was saying. "She has the look I've been searching for, and her spirit is intriguing." "Sir," James replied carefully, "she's asking questions that the others haven't. She seems more aware of the situation than her parents led us to believe." The third, man whose voice Emma didn't recognize, laughed softly. "Awareness can be educated out of someone, Alexander, especially someone so young. The important thing is whether she meets your other criteria." Emma's blood ran cold. Whatever was happening here, it was worse than she had imagined. She was about to step back from the balcony when Mr. Mansfield spoke again, and his words made her freeze. "Tomorrow's ceremony is merely a formality. I've already made my decision. The Richardson girl has the eyes I've been looking for, eyes that remind me of someone I lost long ago. The resemblance is remarkable." "Are you certain she's the one?" James asked, and Emma caught something in his voice that sounded almost like concern. "I've been searching for 15 years, Mr. Mansfield replied. 15 years since my daughter ran away with that worthless man, since the accident that took them both. The girl I've been seeking would be exactly Emma's age now, with exactly her coloring, her features. The private investigator's report confirms what my heart already knows." Emma's mind reeled. Daughter, accident? What was Mr. Mansfield talking about? And why did he think she was connected to his lost daughter? "The adoption records were falsified, as we suspected," the unknown man continued. "David and Margaret Richardson found her through unofficial channels. They've been deeply in debt for years, gambling debts mostly. When we approached them with our offer, they were more than willing to cooperate." The conversation continued, but Emma could barely process what she was hearing. Falsified adoption records, unofficial channels. Her entire life, everything she thought she knew about her identity, was apparently a lie. She crept back into her room and closed the French doors, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the entire house could hear it. Tomorrow there would be some kind of ceremony, and she was apparently the chosen one, but not for the reasons she had been told. Mr. Mansfield believed she was connected to his lost daughter, and Margaret and David had sold her to him to pay off their debts. As she lay in the impossibly comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling painted with cherubs and clouds, Emma made a decision. She would not be a passive participant in whatever Mr. Mansfield had planned. She would not let herself be traded like a commodity or claimed based on a resemblance to someone else. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with the Texas sun streaming through the French doors like a spotlight. Emma was awakened by a soft knock on her door, followed by the entrance of several women in staff uniforms, carrying what appeared to be a wedding dress. "Good morning, Miss Emma," one of them said with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Mansfield has selected this gown especially for you. Today is a very special day." The dress was beautiful, white silk with intricate beadwork and a train that would flow behind her like water. It was also clearly a wedding dress, despite the staff's careful avoidance of that term. Emma's suspicions crystallized into certainty. "What exactly is the ceremony today?" Emma asked as the women began preparing her bath. "A commitment ceremony," one replied vaguely. "Mr. Mansfield will explain everything when the time comes. For now, we need to prepare you to look your very best." As they fussed over her hair and makeup, Emma's mind raced with possibilities. She needed to find a way to expose the truth, to save not just herself, but the other girls who had been brought here under false pretenses. But most importantly, she needed to understand who she really was and why Mr. Mansfield believed she was connected to his past. When they were finished, Emma looked in the mirror and saw a young woman in a wedding dress, prepared for a ceremony she had never agreed to, dressed to become someone she had never chosen to be. But behind the carefully applied makeup and styled hair, her green eyes burned with a determination that no amount of silk and pearls could disguise. Today she would find out the truth about who she really was. And today, she would make sure that truth set not just her free, but everyone else who had been caught in Alexander Mansfield's web of deception and false promises. The estate's main garden had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. White, flowers draped every surface. Musicians in formal attire played soft melodies, and rows of chairs were arranged before an ornate archway where Mr. Mansfield stood waiting. Emma walked down the petal-strewn path, her silk dress rustling with each step, aware that every eye was focused on her. Margaret and David flanked her, their faces glowing with satisfaction. "Remember what we discussed," Margaret whispered urgently. "Be grateful, be obedient. This is the opportunity of a lifetime." "Our future depends on this, Emma," David added, his grip on her arm tighter than necessary. "Don't disappoint us." But Emma barely heard them. Her attention was fixed on Mr. Mansfield, who watched her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read. Triumph mixed with something deeper, more complex. Behind him stood James, whose eyes met hers briefly with what she now recognized as sympathy and regret. As she reached the archway, Emma noticed that the other families had been arranged as witnesses, their daughters standing silently beside. Parents who looked relieved not to be in Emma's position. The ceremony felt like a wedding, but Emma knew it was something far more sinister, a transfer of ownership disguised as a celebration. Mr. Mansfield raised his hand, and the music stopped. The garden fell silent, except for the gentle splash of fountains and the rustle of leaves in the warm Texas breeze. "Friends and witnesses," Mr. Mansfield began, his voice carrying easily across the garden. "Today marks a special moment in the history of the Mansfield family. This young woman will be joining our household in a position of great honor and responsibility." Emma felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had spent hours that morning thinking about what she would do when this moment came, and now she was ready. "Emma Richardson," Mr. Mansfield continued, turning to face her. "Directly, do you accept the role that has been prepared for you? Do you agree to become part of my family, to honor and obey, to take your place as my—" "No," Emma said clearly, her voice cutting through his words like a knife through silk. The garden erupted in shocked murmurs. Margaret gasped audibly, and David's face went white. But Emma stood straighter, her green eyes meeting Mr. Mansfield's directly. "I said no," Emma repeated, louder this time so everyone could hear. "I don't agree to anything. I'm 13 years old and I don't want to be anyone's wife or property or whatever you're trying to make me." The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Mansfield stared at her for a long moment, then slowly began to smile, not the calculating expression she had seen before, but something genuine and almost proud. Perfect, he said softly. Then, louder so everyone could hear, absolutely perfect. Emma blinked, confused by his reaction. This wasn't the anger or disappointment she had expected. Mr. Mansfield raised his hand again, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made everyone freeze. This ceremony is concluded. All witnesses may now leave the premises. James will escort you to your vehicles. What? Margaret shrieked, stepping forward. What about our agreement? What about the money you promised? Mr. Mansfield's expression hardened as he turned to face the Richardsons. Your agreement was based on deception and fraud. James, please ensure that Mr. and Mrs. Richardson understand they are no longer welcome on my property. David's face flushed red. You can't do this. We had a deal. The girl is ours to... The girl, Mr. Mansfield interrupted, his voice cold as winter, is not yours. She never was, and she never will be anyone's property. As security personnel appeared to escort the increasingly agitated Richardsons away, Emma stood frozen in her wedding dress, trying to understand what was happening. The other families were being led away as well, but she remained in the garden with Mr. Mansfield and James. When the last of the witnesses had disappeared, Mr. Mansfield turned back to Emma, but now his entire demeanor had changed. The calculating businessman was gone, replaced by an elderly man whose eyes held deep pain and desperate hope. Emma, he said gently, may I tell you a story? Still wary but curious, Emma nodded. 15 years ago, I had a daughter named Sarah. She was beautiful, intelligent, and strong-willed, much like you. When she was 18, she fell in love with a young man I disapproved of, a ranch hand with no money and no prospects. They ran away together, and I was too proud and too angry to follow them. Mr. Mansfield's voice grew thick with emotion. 2 years later, I learned they had been in an accident. Sarah and her husband were gone, but they had left behind a baby girl, my granddaughter. By the time I found this out, the child had disappeared into the foster system, and despite years of searching, I could never find her. Emma's heart began to pound as she realized where this story was leading. Recently, my private investigator discovered that a child matching my granddaughter's description had been placed with the Richardsons through falsified adoption records. The real parents had been Sarah and her husband, and the child had distinctive green eyes, exactly like her mother's. Mr. Mansfield reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. This is my daughter Sarah when she was your age. Emma stared at the photograph, and it was like looking into a mirror. The girl in the picture had the same green eyes, the same facial structure, the same auburn hair. The resemblance was unmistakable. You're not Alexander Mansfield, the businessman looking for a wife, Emma whispered, understanding flooding through her. You're my grandfather. Tears streamed down the elderly man's face as he nodded. I am. And this entire charade, the fake ceremony, the other families, the deception, it was all designed to confirm what I already knew in my heart. Only my granddaughter would have the courage to stand up to me, to refuse to be intimidated by wealth and power. Only Sarah's daughter would have that fire in her eyes. Emma felt her knees go weak. But why the fake wedding? Why not just tell me the truth? James stepped forward, his earlier formality replaced by genuine warmth. Because we needed to be certain, Miss Emma, and we needed to expose the Richardsons' true motivations. The ceremony was never real. It was theater designed to reveal everyone's true character. The other girls? Emma asked, concern for them, overwhelming her confusion. Are already safely home with their real families, Mr. Mansfield assured her. They were actors, hired to play roles. No real children were ever in danger. Emma sank into one of the garden chairs, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled cream. So Margaret and David aren't my parents? No, sweetheart, Mr. Mansfield said gently, kneeling beside her chair. They found you through a corrupt lawyer who specialized in illegal adoptions. They've been taking money from the state to care for you while planning to sell you to the highest bidder when you came of age. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Everything she had believed about her life, her identity, her family, all of it was a lie built on greed and corruption. But you're free now, Mr. Mansfield continued, taking her hands in his. "You're with family who will love you, protect you and give you choices, real choices. You can stay here and let me be the grandfather I should have been 15 years ago, or you can choose your own path. The decision is entirely yours." Emma looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen from the Richardsons: unconditional love without expectation or agenda. "What about my education? My future?" "You'll have the finest education available, but only if you want it," Mr. Mansfield smiled. "You'll have opportunities to travel, to learn, to become whoever you choose to be. But you'll also have something more important, a family who values you for who you are, not for what you can provide." As the Texas sun began to set, painting the garden in the same golden light that had welcomed Emma the day before, she made her decision. She looked at her grandfather, her real family, and smiled. "I'd like to stay," she said simply. "I'd like to learn about my mother, about our family, and I'd like to help make sure no other children are hurt the way I was." Mr. Mansfield's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of joy. "Then welcome home, Emma Mansfield," he whispered, embracing his granddaughter for the first time. Over the following months, Emma's life transformed in ways she had never imagined possible. She learned about her mother, Sarah, her love of books, her passion for helping others, her determination to follow her heart despite the obstacles. Mr. Mansfield showed Emma photographs, letters, and mementos that painted a picture of a young woman who had been remarkably similar to Emma herself. The estate became a true home rather than a gilded prison. Emma attended a prestigious private school in Dallas, excelling in her studies, while making genuine friends who liked her for herself rather than her newfound wealth. She took riding lessons, learned to paint, and discovered a talent for writing. That reminded her grandfather of her mother's own literary gifts. But, perhaps most importantly, Emma used her experience to help others. Working with James, who she learned had once been in foster care himself, she helped establish a foundation that investigated illegal adoption networks and provided support for children who had been exploited by corrupt systems. The Richardson case became the first of many that they would expose and dismantle. Margaret and David Richardson were prosecuted for their role in the illegal adoption scheme and the attempted sale of a minor. The corrupt lawyer who had facilitated Emma's placement was stripped of his license and faced federal charges. Emma testified at their trials, her courage helping to ensure that justice was served not just for herself, but for other children who had been victims of similar schemes. On her 14th birthday, as Emma stood in the same garden where the fake ceremony had taken place, she reflected on how much her life had changed. She wore a simple blue dress instead of silk and jewels, her hair loose and natural, rather than styled for someone else's expectations. Most importantly, she wore the smile of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. "Any regrets?" her grandfather asked, joining her by the fountain where koi fish swam in lazy circles. Emma considered the question seriously. "I regret that my mother isn't here to see this," she said finally. "But I don't regret anything that led me to you. Even the difficult parts helped make me who I am." Mr. Mansfield nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "Your mother would be proud of the young woman you're becoming, Emma. You have her courage, her compassion, and her unwillingness to accept injustice." As the sun set over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reminded Emma of that first evening in Phoenix when her adventure had begun, she felt complete for the first time in her life. She had found her real family, discovered her true identity, and learned that sometimes the most twisted paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. The fairy tale she had imagined during that first car ride to the airport had come true after all, not in the way she had expected, but in a way that was far more meaningful. She had not been rescued by a prince or saved by magic, but had rescued herself through courage and honesty. And in doing so, she had found something more valuable than any amount of wealth or comfort. She had found herself. Film de Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Emma's incredible journey has touched your hearts as much as it has ours. This story, of courage, family, and the power of standing up for what's right reminds us that even in our darkest moments, truth and love can light the way forward. Emma's transformation from a confused 13-year-old to a confident young woman who uses her experience to help others shows us that our greatest challenges can become our greatest strengths. Just like Emma discovered her true identity, we invite you to discover more amazing stories by subscribing to our channel. Click that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. If Emma's story moved you, show your support by hitting the like button. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these powerful narratives. We've prepared a special playlist of equally captivating stories about family secrets, unexpected discoveries, and the courage to change your destiny. You'll find it right here in the description below. Each story explores the complexity of human relationships and the extraordinary strength we find within ourselves when faced with impossible situations. What did you think of Emma's journey? Have you ever had to find courage you didn't know you possessed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and love connecting with our amazing community. Your stories and insights inspire the content we create every day. Don't forget to share this story with friends and family who appreciate tales of resilience and hope. Stories like Emma's remind us that no matter how lost we might feel, there's always a path forward when we have the courage to take that first brave step. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey.